Okay, so let us begin, and today is July 20th, 2024. So we can begin by doing 3 bows to the Buddha, even mental bows. 1, 2, 3. And then we'll do a salutation one time. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And we're continuing now with our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya. These are the numerical discourses of the Buddha. And today I'll be trying to take 2 suttas number 49 and 51. I skip over 50. 50 is important, but we have that series. We'll keep on repeating with more items added in the later chapters of the Anguttara Nikaya. So we can take it at a later time when we have a fuller list of items. Okay, so the theme of this sutta is the ways in which monks declare arahantship. And so first we'll look at the text of the sutta, and then we'll try to bring out the significance, the meaning, and some of the practical applications of this sutta. Okay, so first we have 2 monks that are going to come to the Buddha, and each will declare arahantship in a slightly different way, but logically they'll turn out to be the same. So one is named Kema, and the other is Sumana. They don't seem to figure very prominently elsewhere in the Nikayas, in the collections of the Buddha's discourses. Okay, so first this monk named Kema comes to the Buddha and says that when he's going to declare indirectly, he doesn't come out and say, I am an arahant, but he's going to make a statement about the way an arahant will think. And so the implication is that he is declaring his own attainment of arahantship, but he does it in this indirect way. It's a little different from the current fashion. Now everybody, well, not everybody, but lots of people go around and say, I am a stream enterer, I'm a once returner, I'm non-returner. Even a few saying, I'm an arahant. Okay, but here's Venerable Kema comes and he says, when a monk is an arahant, and then we have a list of the qualities of the arahant, one whose asavas, the asavas are here it's translated as taints. This is a certain group of defilements: sensual craving, craving for repeated existence, and ignorance. Those are the 3 asavas. And so the distinctive mark of the arahant is that they've eliminated those 3 asavas. So sometimes an arahant is called, particularly in the commentaries, keen asava, one who has destroyed the arahant, one who has destroyed the asavas, who has eliminated the asavas, the taints. Okay, who has lived the brahmacharya, that's the spiritual life of the path, done what had to be done, laid down the burden, reached the goal, the true goal, and utterly destroyed the fetters of existence. So usually the texts enumerate 10 fetters. I'm not going to enumerate them all here. And one who is completely liberated through the final knowledge, the complete knowledge. So that is the general characterization of the arahant. And this is the stock formula that occurs repeatedly in the suttas. But now this is what is distinctive to this particular sutta, to the way this monk implicitly declares arahantship. He says it does not occur to him, there is someone better than me, there is someone equal to me, someone who's just as good as I am, and there is someone inferior to me. Wait. Oh, okay. Okay, so this is what the Venerable Kema said, and the Buddha agrees, I guess, by remaining silent. And the Venerable Kema gets up from his seat, pays homage, and then departs. Okay, then right after the Venerable Kema had left, the other monk named Sumana comes to the Buddha. He recites the same standard description of the Arhat and says that for one who is an Arhat, it does not occur to him, there is no one better than me, there is no one equal to me, there is no one inferior to me. And then the Buddha agrees with him, and then the Venerable Sumana gets up from his seat, pays homage to the Buddha, and then departs. Okay, what I've done, let me go now to the notes file that I prepared to look at these two declarations. They seem to be, in a way, not contradictory, but complementary, and they are both alternative formulations of the standard way of understanding the attainment of Arahantship. Like I mentioned that there are 10 fetters that the Arhat has destroyed. The first 5 are the lower fetters, which are destroyed by all noble. The first 5 fetters are destroyed even by those who attain the 3rd stage of liberation, the stage of the non-returner. So the non-returner has not eliminated all of the fetters, but he's eliminated the fetters that bind a person to the sense sphere or desire realm of existence. So there are, in the Buddhist cosmology, there are 3 basic levels of existence: the desire realm, which includes the lower world, hell's animal realm, the realm of the tormented spirits, the human realm, the animal realm, and then 6 sense sphere heavenly realms in which beings can enjoy still sensory pleasures. And so the non-returner has eliminated the 5 lower fetters that bind to the sensory realm of existence. But the non-returner still has, even in a subtle form, the 5 subtle fetters. And these are the fetters of craving for desire in the form realm, the realm of subtle matter connected with the jhanas, craving for the non-material realm, that is the sort of elevated, exalted realms in which there's only consciousness or mental phenomena, but no material substance. Then the next is conceit, and then comes restlessness, a very subtle kind of restlessness. I think I mentioned this last week. And then the final fetter, the 10th fetter, is ignorance. And so within, even in the non-returner, there is still this tendency, even a subtle tendency, to conceit. And the distinctive achievement of the Arahat is the elimination of conceit. And of course, conceit is, in a sense, an outgrowth of ignorance through the failure to fully penetrate the reality of non-self. And so in the stock standard way of formulating conceit that we find throughout the Nikayas, it's said that there are these three kinds of conceit. So what are the three? There's the conceit, I am superior. And in English, when we use the word conceit, we usually think of the conceit of thinking that one is better than others in particular respects. So I'm more intelligent than others, more beautiful than others, wealthier than others, more powerful than others. I have more followers on Facebook than others. Or and then another kind of conceit is the conceit of I am equal. I am just as good as others. So others might be very outstanding, very intelligent, very wealthy, very powerful, but I am just as good as they are. And then there's a kind of conceit which is a bit contrary to the way conceit is normally used in English, at least American English. This is the conceit, I am inferior. So this is when you look out, you see others are so intelligent, so beautiful or handsome, so strong, so powerful, and then you think, I am a failure, everything that I do goes astray, I'm just stupid, homely, worthless, good for nothing. So from the Buddha's perspective, that also is a kind of conceit. And I think the conceits that, of course, that would remain in the person who has not yet attained arhatship, but is sort of advanced on the path, would not be conceit around intelligence, beauty, wealth, and so on, but regarding spiritual attainment. And so thinking, I'm a great meditator, I can sit for 2 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours at a stretch. I have attained this jhana, this attainment, these stages of insight. And so there's a subtle residue of conceit that can remain even in the non-returner. I remember, it just came to mind, there is a sutta, it's a conversation between Anuruddha. Anuruddha was a monk who was, I think, a cousin of the Buddha, and the Venerable Sariputta. Sariputta was the foremost in wisdom. And I think at that time, Anuruddha maybe was a non-returner. And Anuruddha comes to Sariputta and says, I just don't get it, man. I have the divine eye. So the divine eye is a kind of spiritual faculty of vision by which I can sort of look out, not just over this earth, but it's like, the Hubble telescope, and now they have the James Webb telescope, that you get galaxy upon galaxy. So it took the West like centuries of scientific progress and took the most brilliant scientists and technicians to develop the Webb telescope, and it takes brilliant astrophysicists to interpret the data coming through the Webb telescope. But 2,500 years ago, Anuruddha had, without any technological equipment, had the Webb telescope built into his very body. So he says, I can look out at the sky and I see millions and millions of galaxies. Just as though, I think he uses a simile of a person up on a tower, looks out upon the landscape and sees one farm after another farm after another farm. So he's up on a tower, maybe hundreds of feet high, and he sees all of these farms. It's just like when we ride on a plane. When you cross the country, you look out the window and you see one farm after another after another. So Anuruddha says, I look out with my divine eye and I see just world system after world system after world system, galaxies upon galaxies. But he mentioned something else, but my mind is still not free from the asavas. I still haven't achieved arhatship. And then Sariputta says to him that when you go about saying, I have this wonderful divine eye, that shows you have conceit. The fact that you're concerned about not achieving arhatship, that shows you still have restlessness. And then he mentions something else, but I don't remember what it is. Okay, so this is shows that even in the non-returner, not yet attained arhatship, there's still this tendency of conceit. So these are the three kinds of conceit. And now we have variations on this in the sutta that we've just went through. So this is kama, and this is the way I've tried to work it out to correlate the declarations of these monks with the standard types of conceit. So when somebody thinks there is someone better than me, that is a kind of way of expressing the inferiority conceit. You think, okay, if somebody like a monk looks out and sees this one is declaring arhatship, this one is declaring non-returner, this one is claiming to achieve the jhanas, but I ain't got nothing. So then you feel inferior. Okay, so if somebody thinks there's someone equal to me, of course that's the equality conceit. And then when you think there's someone inferior to me, then you're putting yourself in a superior position. So that is the conceit, I am superior. And so Kema says that the Arahat doesn't make any of these declarations or even entertain these thoughts. So this shows how the Arhat doesn't have the three kinds of conceit, the standard conceit. Okay, then Suma's declaration, there is no one better than me. So this implies either that I am the best, that everyone is below me in some respect, or it can also imply that we are equal. So if everybody is equal, implies there's no one better than me. There is no one equal to me. I think that would generally mean that there's no one that I am superior, so I am the best. And there is no one inferior to me. So that is where generally you would think, I'm the worst. Everybody is better than me. But it could also mean, sort of at least logically, that we're equal. We're all equally bad. Okay, so the Arahat doesn't entertain any of these thoughts. So in this way, this correlates with the three standard ways of formulating Arahatship. So, and maybe looking at this in somewhat practical terms, so we could say that the tendency to conceit in any of these modes is a standard human disposition. Even you don't have to think in terms of Buddha psychology, but it's just a standard human disposition. And now what seems to me to be the case, because we all have this yearning and aspiration to be the best, to be superior. But in our current day culture, the standards of being superior are always set up so high, perhaps through the popular media, entertainment. So we have like the most beautiful actors and actresses, people in reach high positions in public life, have gone to Harvard and Yale, Harvard, what, the Kennedy School of Public Administration, coming out with a PhD from there, or Yale Law School, or Princeton, Albert Einstein, is there some institute of technology there? And so we come to feel, I think, the governing tendency was spread so far throughout the popular culture these days is the conceit of I am inferior. And this might explain maybe why there's such widespread use, one of the factors contributing to widespread use of drugs, of alcoholism and drugs. So people want to sort of eliminate and to suppress and to eradicate that feeling of being inferior, being worthless. And it's such a debilitating feeling. Excuse me, I have this tendency now to get phlegm in the throat. But you just want to get rid of that feeling of, it causes a kind of feelings of dejection, even clinical depression. And so those who are able to go to, maybe to get psychological help, and the doctors will prescribe medications that will eliminate or at least temporarily suppress the feelings of depression, when it's clinical depression. Or people will go, those who can afford can go to psychotherapists to speak about, probably, I don't know, I don't have experience with psychotherapists, but does anybody go to a psychotherapist to complain, I'm feeling superior, how do I get rid of the superiority complex? I think usually they go to the psychotherapist to complain, I'm feeling worthless, useless, everybody, I get the sense everybody is better than me. And so this is, I think, the widespread feeling that's dominant in our contemporary culture, particularly here in the West. Yeah, so how do we deal with this kind of conceit in a practical way? I should have brought... Yeah, people are always giving me these sucking candies that clear up the throat, but I put them in my room. Okay, I'll be okay. Okay, so the way to deal with conceit, this is a kind of practical exercise that helps to at least temporarily overcome any of these three kinds of conceit. And that is, one does this as a meditative reflection. It doesn't have to be a deep level of insight, but you just examine yourself in terms of we have the standard formula of the 5 aggregates, the kind of template for investigating our experience. So we have the body, then feelings, this would be pleasant, painful, neutral feelings, perceptions, which we can think of in terms of ideas, the ideas that come through into our mind, our intentions, aims, and purposes, and then the consciousness, the awareness. So we think like, what am I from the Buddhist perspective? I am, looking with the eye of wisdom, an assemblage of these 5 aggregates. And then we can just reflectively, one runs through them using the formula. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. And so we can just reflectively go through each aggregate, starting with the body, the physical body. This is not mine. I am not this. Yeah, in ancient India, because there was the multitude of philosophical views that revolved around the Atman, or in Pali it becomes the Attan, or Atta. So this becomes very important, the eliminating the idea of self. But I think in contemporary times, we think predominantly in terms of I and mine. But we could bring in all three phrases. Go through first the body. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. Then we go through our feelings. Again, not mine, not I, not myself. Then ideas, the ideas that we entertain. Brilliant ideas, stupid ideas, ordinary, bland, pedestrian ideas, all of them, not mine, not I, not myself. Then our projects, our plans, our intentions, purposes, aims. Of course, we need aims and purposes in order to act in a meaningful way in life, but we sort of break the identification with them, contemplating them, not mine, I am not this, this is not myself. And then we come to even the basic awareness. This is not mine, I am not this, this is not myself. And those three types of reflections, or three phrases in this reflection, each are intended to sort of weaken and break one of the three grips. So we have the grip of craving is what takes things to be mine, or the desire to acquire things as mine. Conceit revolves around the idea I am. And then philosophical views, which were very prevalent in ancient India among the philosophers and thinkers, what do we take to be the true, eternal, essential self? So we look through all the five aggregates. This is not myself. And so when we apply this, we don't have to think now of attaining this stage, that stage, or going out and attaining Arahantship. But if we just use these three phrases and examine, you could use all five aggregates, or you can just bring the four mental aggregates together, just as taking them to be the mind. And so we examine the body, not mine, not I, not myself, the mind and all of the different mental functions, not mine, I am not this, this is not myself. And this will help to weaken all three of these types of conceit. So you can just try it as an experiment. It really takes just a few minutes. You could do this sort of at the end of your meditation. Just do a kind of, very good, thank you so much. Yeah, exactly what I wanted. Just do a kind of reflective meditation on these, applying these phrases to either the five aggregates individually, or taking the body, mind, breaking them up into body and mind, or just taking the whole thing, just observing your whole organism and taking not mine, I am not this, this is not myself. Okay, so now let's just come to the last part of the sutta, and then we'll take some questions. Okay, so after both of these monks have departed, then the Buddha speaks to the community as a whole, and he says, it is in such a way that clansmen, maybe a bad choice of words, because it suggests now to use the word clansmen as members of the Ku Klux Klan. We'll say it is in such a way that people declare final knowledge. Final knowledge is the knowledge of Arahantship, equivalent with Arahantship. And then there's a word play here, I think. They state the meaning, but don't exalt themselves. Yeah, in English, it's really difficult to bring out I say impossible, to bring out the word play. So I have a note here. So it's atto cha vuto, atta cha upanito. So atto means meaning or purpose, and it sounds very similar to atta. Atta is self. And so what the Buddha is saying is that they speak the meaning, or they speak about the goal, atto, anupanito, without reference to atta, to the self. So we have this wordplay between atta, meaning or goal, and atta, meaning self. But then the Buddha adds that there are some foolish men here who, it seems, declare final knowledge as a joke. I don't quite get the sense of this. People will come to the Buddha and say, I've attained arhatship as a joke, but this is what the text is saying. And then he said, but they will meet with distress later. Yeah, I don't recall cases in the suttas of people declaring arhatship as a joke, but there is a problem that we do meet, and there's a quality called adhimana, which again, it is based on the word mana. Mana is a word that means conceit, and adhimana means thinking that one has attained what one has not attained. That is, having a false understanding of one's experience, a false interpretation of one's experience, so that one has attained, undergone maybe a special experience in meditation, and one thinks, that must be a jhana, or that must be a formless meditation, or that must be an attainment of the path, of the world transcending path. And so people they're not trying to deceive others, not making deliberately false claims to attainment, but they have a special experience and they wrongly interpret that experience as being an attainment, which it is not. Okay, let us see if we have some questions. So we take them in this order in which. Okay, so I think the first one is Samangi.
Yes, Bhante, thank you. So, overall, if I'm understanding, Buddha is saying, don't be so concerned about where you are standing in defining where you are or something like that. Do what you have to do to get to the arhatship. Is that correct, my understanding?
I think he would say that elsewhere, but I'm not quite sure that that is the purpose of this statement. Just in this statement, he seems to be saying that don't declare final knowledge or arhatship as a joke. So I can't, I
Are
can,
they supposed to declare at all or just be silent about it?
well, people do come to the Buddha and they do make those declarations. And the Buddha, if they're genuine, the Buddha will approve of them.
Okay.
So we do see in the suttas that usually it's described in the sutta as the monk so and so went off into seclusion, he dwelt ardent, diligent, and resolute, and then in no long time he reached that supreme goal of the spiritual life and directly knew, finished his birth. The spiritual life has been lived, what had to be done has been done. There is no coming back to this conditioned existence. So they must have made some kind of declaration of arhatship.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let us move on with the questions. And so I think the next one would be Doran.
Thank you, Bhante. Early on, you mentioned the asavas. Not sure. So one question. So this is a small question. One question is about asava, the word inflow, outflow. But the question really is, I believe that I read about 4 of them, and you mentioned 3 of them. One is kama asava and avijja asava and bhava asava.
Yeah.
And then what about priti asava? Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah. In text of a somewhat later period, sort of in the old Nikayas, we find 3 asavas. So the 3 kamasava, the influx or outflow of or taint of sensual craving. Then bhavasava, that is the asava of craving for existence, for repeated existence. And then avijasava, the asava of ignorance. In probably beginning in the Abhidhamma period, ditthi, that is views, wrong views, becomes added as a 4th asava. And then that becomes sort of standardized in the Abhidhamma, 4 asavas. But in the oldest text, we just have 3.
thank you.
Okay, now we come to Deborah.
Yes, thank you, Bhante. I wanted to ask a question about the other sutta that you referred to. The issue, it seems, if I tie it to this one, is that the speaker's idea was, I have these, I don't know if he thinks of them as attainments, I have these psychic powers, therefore I should be an arahant. Is that the conceit of that? Not that he is acknowledging the powers, but rather what he thinks they imply about his spiritual attainments.
Yeah, you're referring to that passage with Anuruddha.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't remember it in such detail. But I think, let me see if I could find it quickly.
Because there's been many suttas where psychic powers are acknowledged, but it seemed like he was taking it as a mark of some kind of
He might have been
superiority.
thinking that since he had that divine eye, that he should have been an arhat.
Yes, and that's the problem.
It's not so fresh in my mind.
Oh, that's fine.
Not that it just occurred to me when I was speaking.
Yeah. That seems like that would be the tie-in to this. Thank you.
Yeah, anyway, the computer's moving a bit slowly, so I don't want to get detained.
Right, that's fine. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, did we have any further questions? Okay, I see, okay, Margarita.
Morning, Bhante. So this is, I think, a very basic question. What was the purpose of coming to the Buddha to declare that one has attained this or that stage? Did that have to do with the organization of the Sangha, or was there a further purpose, or simply?
I think they might have wanted to get a kind of confirmation from the Buddha to ensure that their attainment was genuine. That's all I could, that would be my conjecture.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so Samangi, did you have another question?
Yeah, if I may. So, do people when they attain arahantship not know they attained arahant? I'm referring to the previous question. Know that they have achieved arahantship. They have to confirm with Buddha, or how it is?
Yeah, I would think that somebody who has attained will certainly have a very strong sense that they've attained, though there are cases of this, what they call the adhimana, that quality I just mentioned, where somebody overrates their experience, overestimates their attainment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I want to move on now to the next sutta. Yeah, that is adhimana, that is that overestimation. And this is a sutta concerned with learning the Dhamma thoroughly and well. And I think it's very important to know this because people think, all we have to do is do a little meditation and that is sort of fulfills our responsibilities as a follower of the Buddha Dhamma. But the Buddha emphasized, at least for certain people, not everybody has to become thoroughly learned in the Dhamma. But this is especially a teaching given for bhikkhus or bhikkhunis who want to learn the Dhamma thoroughly, but also there are lay people who aspire to learn the Dhamma thoroughly. Is my voice coming through okay? The audio?
Yes, Bhante, we can hear you.
Okay, so in this sutta, a little bit strangely, Ananda comes to Sariputta and says to him, how does a monk get to hear a teaching he has not heard before? How does he not forget those teachings he has already heard? And how do those teachings with which he had previously been familiar recur to him? And how does he get to understand what he has not understood? Okay, now the question is in a way, let's say the conversation is a kind of setup in that Ananda is not actually unclear about the answers to those questions, but the dialogue is sort of set up, I think, almost like a literary device in order to bring out these steps to be fulfilled in order to achieve great learning. And so Sariputta says to Ananda that you are learned. In fact, the Buddha praises Ananda as the foremost of all the disciples with respect to learning. He says, you explain the matter yourself. And then Ananda is going to answer. So he says, first, a monk learns the Dhamma, and then he mentions different types of teachings. But the most important for our purposes are to learn the discourses, the suttas. And so we have to remember now, in the Buddha's time, we didn't have written books. And so if you want to learn the teaching, you have to approach a teacher. That's an indispensable requirement. for becoming acquainted with the Dhamma. You have to attend discourses on the Dhamma, whether by the Buddha himself or by established, accomplished disciples. And then you learn the teaching. And then the standard formula goes that you learn the teaching, you listen to the teaching. In fact, the word meaning learn literally is, or at least one of the words is sunati. One listens to the teaching. And then one has to retain it in mind. So you learn the teaching, but then to ensure that you really understand it, the next step, one teaches the Dhamma to others in detail as you have heard it and learned it. In my own experience, this is a very, very valuable step because sometimes you assume when you just study on your own, we're getting some other sound.
Yes, Bhante, you are correct. Sheila needs to mute her audio.
How do I get this back? Okay. Okay, so to learn the Dhamma well, a very important and valuable step. So don't try to start off with this as soon as you study a little bit of the Dhamma. But once you get a certain amount of textual knowledge, a good way to ensure that you learn it well is to try to explain it to others, to teach others. One shouldn't be in a hurry to do this because you might explain wrongly. But when you have to teach others, then you really have to investigate, sort of probe into the teaching and find a way to organize it systematically. So what I often do, as you see, like when I come to one sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, sometimes I'll collect a number of related suttas, and then we explore that particular topic by looking at the related suttas. And I find that this helps me to learn and to understand the Dhamma more thoroughly. So you teach others as you've heard it and learned it. And then a third step, which seems very similar here to number 2, one makes others repeat the Dhamma in detail as they have heard it and learned it. And this is, in the ancient Indian context, this was again an important step for ensuring the transmission of the Dhamma, because they didn't have books, so you don't tell somebody, go to the library and take out this book, and you don't hand them a few books, or tell them, go to Amazon and order this book, that book. But for people to learn the Dhamma and to really get mastery over the Dhamma, they have to hear it from the teacher, and the way the teacher transmits it to the next generation, sort of the future generation of teachers, is to make them repeat it and repeat it in detail and correctly. And this was a method of learning that was transmitted in India like long before the Buddha's time by the Brahmins who would teach the Vedas. And this tradition of learning still continues in the present day in India amongst the Brahmins. It's not enough for a Brahmin to take a book with the Vedas and open it up and read the Vedas. But even if you go to YouTube, you could put maybe Vedic learning, and you'll see little videos of Brahminic communities in India where the Brahmin teacher is surrounded by a group of usually they're little boys when they start off, maybe 8, 9 years old, perhaps even younger, and the teacher will recite a line from the Vedas, and then the student will repeat, and they go on like this, and the student has to memorize, not just repeat, but they memorize in this way. And this method of teaching was adopted by the Buddhists as well. Even, I think it continues in the current day in countries like Sri Lanka, in the traditional monasteries, and Myanmar, maybe Thailand, where the teacher will recite, well, now they use books actually, but they will try to memorize a passage from of a text, and then they walk back and forth. They have like walkways where they walk back and forth, reciting the text, looking at the book, reciting, looking at the book, reciting, until they memorize, they can memorize. And by using this method, there are monks that are able to retain in memory like whole nikayas. And sometimes some can even retain all 4 nikayas and even more. It's quite possible. And in Burma, there are some monks who are called Tripitaka-dharas, those who are able to memorize the entire Tripitaka, and they have tests, the way they test them. Because, of course, you can't tell a monk, okay, sit down, start reciting the Tripitaka, and this is going to take like weeks and weeks and weeks. So the way they test them is they open a book, sort of the master will open the book, and then read a passage, and then say, okay, you continue. And then the monk has to continue and pick it up. And if he can do that, and then it'll take number of texts from the different collections. And if the monk can do that, then they can determine that he's likely Tripitaka master. Actually, it seems that the order of this is not in correct order. It seems number 4 should actually be number 3, because first you have to be able to recite the Dhamma in detail yourself. In fact, it seems number 4 should be number 2. First you recite the Dhamma in detail as you've heard it and learned it. Actually, the whole thing seems that the order of all of these things is jumbled. Okay, first you learn the teaching, and then to ensure that you've learned it well, then you will recite it in detail as you've heard it and learned it. Then you would ponder, examine, and mentally inspect the Dhamma as you've heard it and learned it. So this is where you move from just learning the text by rote in a mechanical way to try to understand the meaning. Then, when there are points that you're unsure about, when you're mentally investigating, then you would go to others who are experts on the Dhamma, experts on the discipline. From time to time you approach them, then you inquire, how is this? What is the meaning of this? And then those elders will disclose, clear up obscure points, explain the meaning. So in this way you get the understanding of the meaning, and then you become qualified as a teacher, and then you can teach the Dhamma to others in detail as you've learned it. And once you get a bunch of disciples, pupils, then you make them repeat the Dhamma in detail as they've heard it and learned it. Yeah, so let's reorder this. In fact, first, it seems to me that number 1 is the generality, that you learn the Dhamma in the different aspects. So how do you go about learning the Dhamma? Well, first you have to maybe approach teachers and listen to it. Then once you've heard it, then you recite the Dhamma in detail. This is the way of learning, by looking at a portion from the book. You walk back and forth, reciting, till you get it imprinted on the memory. Then you try to investigate the meaning, number 5. When there are points that are obscure, unclear, then you approach learned elders to inquire about the meaning. Then you become qualified, at least to some extent, to teach others. And so then you start teaching others in detail as you've heard it and learned it. Then once you have like the next generation of potential teachers under you, or a group of students that you want to train to become teachers, then you make them recite the Dhamma in detail as they've heard it and learned it from you. So we have to, I think, reshuffle the order of these factors. Okay, maybe we could see if we have any additional questions. And let's give priority. I keep on looking at the screen for questions, but anybody in the hall have questions? Okay, is that Helen? Yeah, let us take the microphone.
When you say to learn the Dhamma, do you exclusively mean the suttas, or can it be like the Four Noble Truths? When you say learn the Dhamma, does that mean exclusively the suttas, or can it be generally the Four Noble Truths, really learning the Four Noble Truths?
Well, here it's speaking, it uses the breakdown of the different categories of texts that were in circulation during the Buddha's time. So it's through, especially through the discourses, that you would come to get acquainted with the fundamentals of the Buddha's teaching, like the Four Noble Truths, Five Aggregates, Dependent Origination. But these are like other classifications of the teachings. But here it seems to be speaking not simply about how one acquires a theoretical understanding of the principles of the Buddha's teaching, but how one becomes, call us a Dharma master, one who has a mastery over the texts. And of course, Venerable Ananda is the one who excels in that capacity, because after the Buddha's passing, when the monks gathered in Rajagaha in order to collect the teachings, then they called on Ananda, Venerable Ananda, to become the one who recites these suttas. And then as Ananda recites them, that collection becomes the Sutta Pitaka. Okay, any other questions here in the hall? Okay, so now I'll look online. Okay, so I see the first one is Dora. Oh, no, it's not Dora, it's Alan.
Yes, Bhante, good morning. Thank you so much for your teachings, your translations. I'm a bit curious about the fourth item about reciting before pondering and examining. And I guess a bit of it is, obviously at the time when the Dhamma had to be memorized and we had the verbal discourses to continue the teachings of the Buddha, that was a really important step. But I guess as we're here today and we have wonderful translations of the Pali Canon that you have contributed so much to, I tend to ponder them, examine them mentally more so than I'm learning to recite them verbatim at that time. And I'm just curious about like the perspective of as we're learning it today and students of it today, what your perspective on the need to completely memorize those before pondering, examining them versus it's okay to ponder and examine, and at one point you become more familiar and you'll memorize more of it.
Yeah, I would say now, I would say sort of reciting the Dhamma in detail sort of has faded in importance in general, as part of a general process. So one could go directly from reading the texts as one finds them in printed versions, and then moving to pondering, examining, and inspecting the meaning of the text. But especially during the early period, first 300, 400 years, there were no written texts. And so the way to ensure that the texts were preserved and transmitted from one generation to the next had to be done through oral transmission, through memorization. And the way to ensure that the texts get well imprinted in the memory is by reciting them.
Yes, that's thank you, Bhante.
But even, today you could say that, particularly when we do it in Pali, but people who don't know Pali can do it in English, that it gives a certain joy and upliftment and delight to the mind just to recite from the printed text. So it's not just a matter of reading and then moving directly into investigation, but you can get some kind of deeper sort of joy and delight in the Dhamma by reciting, even from translations. And another thing nowadays, what I would add as a factor for learning the Dhamma, which would not have been applicable in the Buddha's time, when one is reading, to take notes and then to try to organize the material through one's notes so that one could get, maybe call this a global or comprehensive perspective on the Dhamma. So this is what I did. I'll tell you my secret. Don't tell anybody else. This is back in the period when I was first studying the Buddhist text, 1973, 74. So first my teacher, he had in his library the Pali Text Society English translations. So I read them in English, in the English translation, and I would take notes of the important, sort of summaries of the important suttas. And at the same time, I was studying Pali, the Pali language. Okay, once I had sufficient knowledge of Pali language, then I went back and read the text in Pali, and I formed different headings or categories for setting down my notes on the suttas. So I started out, say, as a category, Four Noble Truths. There would be a broad category. Then I would have a set of notes on dukkha, on suffering, and then notes on impermanence, then on non-self. Then there would be a category, dependent origination, then craving, a category of defilements, then the different factors of the path, like the category Noble Eightfold Path, 7 factors of enlightenment, then samadhi, panya or wisdom, like that. And then I would not copy whole suttas, but I would just put a few sentences to indicate what the sutta is about, and then the reference, where to find that sutta. And so in that way, when somebody asks me, where is such and such a sutta, nowadays, it's a little bit like putting a search word into a computer. I could... Okay, let's say okay, so now, next question will be Gita.
First, I want to say thank you so much. We're so fortunate to have you with us, among us, and teaching us. So sadhu, sadhu, sadhu for that. Bhante, I agree with what you said and what Alan said too, because I found that it's different from when Buddha was there, because everybody had to memorize. So now, using your Nikayas and F.L. Woodward's, the earlier translations, I found I make notes. I make important notes, and I memorize those notes, and I close my notes and rewrite them, and then imprint it in my mind so that it commits to my memory. Then I can contemplate on it. But for the chanting, what I do is I use a book that has Pali and English. So I recite the Pali and it gets committed to the memory. And then I also read the English right below it so that I understand those Pali translations.
Yeah, that is very good. Yeah, that is very, very good.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you, Bhante, for sharing the Dhamma once again.
Yeah, and I think even if you don't know Pali, but still if you have the Pali on one side, the English translation on another, you could recite the Pali in order to get what I call this kind of joy of connecting with the early formulation of the text. You have most direct sense of connection with the Buddha and with early Buddhism through the Pali. And then through the English translation, then you get a sense of the meaning.
Exactly. Then you can penetrate that meaning with our real life experience,
Yeah, because you
which
don't
is
want
really good.
just recite, you don't want to just recite blindly.
Yes.
So with access to the in English translation, you get a sense of the meaning, but the Pali has a very nice sound and rhythm, and the words have very precise meanings that sort of resonances and connections that can't be captured in English translation. Okay, we'll
Thank you,
take one more
Bhante.
question, then we'll have to close. This will be Margarita.
Thank you, Bhante, again. So I had a question about the way the Dhamma is categorized here. I mean, the different categories that Ananda presents. So the discourses, that would be very clear, but how are those different from expositions, for instance, right? So birth stories are very clear too, but what would amazing accounts correspond to? Would that refer to miracles, for instance? And how
Some of us are rather strange, and the commentary is, let's say the oldest texts don't explain the meaning of all of these terms. So the commentary gives some explanation, and sometimes one is not sure that the commentary is really capturing the original meaning of these terms. Okay, so the discourses, these I think would be the standard suttas in which the Buddha is giving a straight discourse. So mixed prose and verse, these would correspond to a lot of suttas in the first book of the Samyutta Nikaya, in which you find prose passage usually followed by verse. In fact, even sutta number 49 here that we just went through, it ends with a verse, which I didn't bring in. Okay, then suttas in verse, these would be just texts that consist entirely of verse, like maybe the most common example would be the Dhammapada. Expositions, this is Vyakarana. I think this is where somebody comes to the Buddha and says that there's such and such an expression that's in common usage. What is the meaning of this? And then the Buddha will give the explanation of that expression, of that passage. So it's a kind of elaboration or clarification of a short statement. Okay, then the inspired utterance, this is in Pali Udana, and this is said to correspond, there's a book in the minor collection of the Pali Canon called the Udana. So that would be suttas where the Buddha observes a particular incident and then utters, usually in verse, an uplifting, joyful statement. So that becomes the Udana. What's called quotations here is Iti Vutaka, and this becomes another small collection in the Pali Canon, the Iti Vutaka. The birth stories, these are the Jatakas. So these would be the oldest birth stories. Some of them we find scattered in the Sutta Pitaka. Amazing accounts. I think this is Abutta. Maybe this is a count of miraculous events, not very clear. And then the last one, even the translation here is speculative. It's Vedala, which the commentary explains it with reference to two suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 43 and number 44, but it's a kind of open category which became a subject of a lot of sort of controversy and disputes. And Vedala in Sanskrit then became retranslated, in Sanskrit, what is called Vedala in Pali in Sanskrit becomes turned into Vaipulya, which means expanded. And that then becomes understood as the Mahayana Sutras, because the Mahayana Sutras can run, 200, 300, 400 pages. And so the Mahayana say, you see, the Buddha spoke the Mahayana Sutras, and we classify them as the Vaipulya Sutras. But the other schools, the non-Mahayana schools, say, you are cheating by reformulating that word, Vedala. You're reformulating it as Vaipulya and using that as a pretext for putting your Mahayana Sutras, ascribing them to the Buddha. Okay, I think we're going to have to end now. And so we'll end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so I'm going to share the merits with the Devas and the other beings. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasa ta chabumata Deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Dukha pata jani dukha baya pata jani baya soka pata jani soka pantu sabe pipanino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we're going to end with 3 bows to the Buddha. And we have the Buddha image behind me. Okay, so we do 3 bows. Okay, so thank you for joining.
Bow to Bhante Bodhi. Thank you, Bhante.
Sadhu,
Thank you,
sadhu.
Bhante. Thank you, Bhante Bodhi.
Thank you, Bhante. Good to see
Great
you.
lunch,
Thank you.
Bhante. Be safe and well. Teruvan Sannai Namo Buddhaya. We'll see you next Wednesday. Have a good lunch, Bhante. Be safe, be well.
Okay, thank you.
Teruvan Sannai.
Thank you,
Bhante.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
everybody.
Amitabha.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Bhante.
Okay, take care. I'm going to end the recording now.
Thank you.